Hey, what is up everyone, welcome back to another tutorial video, and in this one I'm going to show you how to improve your FPS in Apex Legends. So unlike those power plan options and performance mods which you can do through your Windows PC, this one's a bit different because it's gonna rely on editing a config file. Now before you get worried and asking me questions, one, it's safe to do, it doesn't get you banned. I've been using this for a whole season on 2 of my accounts and I didn't get banned. So it's actually pretty safe to use, and 2, it's also pretty easy to understand and do this yourself. Okay, now before we start editing the config file and change the values, first we need to head to the game and change a few in-game settings to make sure that you get the best possible experience. Alright, now display mode should be set to full screen for the best possible experience. Aspect ratio, resolution should be the native values of your display. You can actually turn down the resolution by 1 or 2 to gain about 50 to 70% FPS on average. Now I'm using a 16:10 aspect ratio because I want to stretch out my display, because it feels like a bit easier to hit targets with a stretched hitbox. It's a personal preference thing, so don't mind too much to that. And 1050p and 1080p is not gonna make a huge difference in the FPS. There is a bit of tiny difference there, but not a huge to spoil this whole tutorial thing. So just use the resolution that you prefer. If you don't mind the visual quality, yeah, you can turn down the resolution to get more FPS. Brightness, field of view, screen view shake is gonna be on your personal preference. Use whatever the value you want, doesn't make a huge difference on the FPS. VSync should be turned off. Adaptive resolution FPS target is the most important settings in the whole in-game settings, but we'll come back to that in a few seconds. So anti-aliasing, set that to TSAA if you have too many jag lines on your screen and you don't like that, because I personally don't like having too many jag lines because it kind of makes it a bit difficult to spot enemies if they are a bit too far, and I sometimes get confused if it's an enemy moving or it's a graphical artifact or something like that. So I'm using TSAA, but if you want to squeeze out every drop of frame rate, you can turn that to none. Now texture streaming budget should be the amount of free RAM you have in your video card. So mine is a 3 gigs version, so I'm using 3 gigs. So just use whatever the value of your card is. You can also turn that to off to gain every tiny bit of FPS you want, but I think it's not gonna make a huge difference when it comes to FPS. So just use whatever the value of your video card is for the texture streaming budget. Now everything else, just completely turn it off, disable or the lowest possible settings, because you're not gonna notice that much of a visual quality when you're playing a competitive game like this. So just turn everything off and it's gonna boost your FPS actually marginally, that you'll notice the difference. Okay, now let's get back to the adaptive resolution FPS target. Now this is the one that's gonna give you the most performance boost in the whole game. So how it works is by, if you set the FPS target to say 100 FPS, and when the game drops below that, it will dynamically lower your resolution to maintain that 100 FPS on all the time. So if you're using a 1080p, then the game will try to adjust it to a 900 or 720p to maintain that 100 FPS on all the time. On most cases, it's not gonna make much of a difference in the visual quality. You won't notice much of a difference. The most occasions that I think you're gonna notice are, one, when you're about to jump off the airship, which is gonna make the game look much worse than any other instance in the game, because that's when the FPS is at its lowest. So it's gonna make the whole game look like a jaggy mess with blurry visuals. So it's fine, it's only gonna last till you jump out of the ship, and when you land, everything will get back to normal. And 2 is some really hectic moments with lots of scouts running around, and if you're in a really demanding, graphically intensive area, then also at that time you can notice the difference. So make sure you set the FPS target to a realistic value for your graphics card. What I meant by that is, say if you have a card that can barely handle 60 FPS with the game, and if you put the FPS target to 100, which is already a higher value than the card can handle, then the game will be running at mostly at 720 or 900p at most times, and you can actually notice the difference on all the equations. And on hectic moments and when you're about to jump off the airship, that's gonna only look worse. So yeah, just make sure to put on a value that your card can handle at least on some occasions, or else it's gonna look much worse. Alright then, once you set all these values, you're safe to exit the game. And oh yeah, by the way, you can disable the adaptive super sampling, we don't need that. And now it's time to jump into the config file. To open the config file, navigate to your local disk C, then users, your username, saved games, respawn, apex, local, then video config.txt. Just open it with any of your favorite text editor. Now once you're in there, there's a few values that you'll need to change no matter whatever FPS you're targeting to. Alright, these are the values that you should change first. Particle fallback base to 2, fallback multiplier to 1, depth demand min to 0, shadow depth uprest factor max to 0, shadow max dynamic to 0, SSA enabled should be set to 0, and coming down to CSM enabled to 0, CSM coverage to 0, CSM cascade rest to about 256, and that's the common values that you need to change no matter what FPS you're targeting to. So now we get into the complicated stuff, which is these DBS enabled and GPU frame time min and max values. So this is the adaptive FPS target which was in the game. So right now if you have enabled this in the game, it's gonna show DBS enabled as 1. So if you are targeting a specific frame rate, then put this value to 1, and this DBS GPU frame time min and max are the most important values in this whole config file. So a few values should be popping up in the screen right now, and you should use the values that you're targeting your frame rates to. Say for example you're targeting 120 fps, then the minimum value should be 8000 and maximum value should be 8200. Just like before, bear that in mind. Using too high of a fps target will make the game look worse. Alright, once you made all the changes in the config file, you can safely save it and exit. Now make sure to put this config file to read only, because if you do not do that, the game will rewrite all the default values back to the config file and the changes you've done won't reflect in the game. So make sure to tick this read only, so the game will be forced to run in the settings. And yeah, that's about it. After doing this, you should be seeing a noticeable performance increase, especially if you have used this adaptive FPS target method. Yeah, anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this video and found this one helpful, and if you have any questions relating to this, just leave them in the comments and I'll try my best to answer it in any way. And yeah, as always, I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace out.